Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming to our webinar session on American Kinesiology Association. Today, we're taking our time to talk about sport management and kind of its role in kinesiology and the unique situations it kind of plays. And so I can't stress how excited actually I am today to bring Dr. Damon Andrews on with this. This has been a personal joy of mine, one, because I have studied his work back when I was a student, and then as I've gotten to be a professional in the sport management field, got to meet him personally, and am extremely excited for what he has to share today. But I think we noticed that sport management sometimes has been kind of niched inside American Kinesiology Associations because we have a huge background in exercise science and physical education. Sport management has kind of come up as something different and unique, and I thought that would be a good topic we can explore, and I had some people ask questions about it, and so we're lucky enough to actually reach out to Dr. Andrew and have him be willing to fill those in. So do you want to share real quickly, Dr. Andrew, your background maybe a little bit on kind of where you are and how you came to come be in this position?
Sure. Well, I guess when it comes to the different areas of kinesiology, I've had academic training in a lot of the different subdisciplines. So my undergraduate degree is in physical education, kind of an exercise science specialty. I have a master's degree in exercise physiology. I have another master's degree in biomechanics. I have another master's degree in sport management, and then my PhD was earned here in sport management at Florida State University back in 2004. Then joined the faculty at University of Louisville in their sport management program, and directed their doctoral program for a few years. Then went over to University of Tennessee to found and direct a doctoral program in sport management for a few years. Then transitioned to Troy University as Dean of the College of Health and Human Services. Was there for 5 years and had kinesiology and sport management in that college. And then I went to LSU as Dean of their new College of Human Sciences and Education, where they had merged 3.5 colleges together to create one large mega college, and it had a standalone School of Kinesiology that had sport management program in it as well. And then now I'm back at my doctoral alma mater, Florida State University, as Dean of the College of Education, and we also have a standalone Department of Sport Management in the college.
That is definitely an exhaustive list of coverage. And I think that gives a good purview of kind of as we go through and talk a little diversity in sport management as far as programming and things like that, and where it might be going. I think that gives you definitely a leg up when it comes to explaining those things as we go forward. So I guess the first question I want to actually provide is for our listeners who may not have a sport management program or who may not have involved. I mean, this may be where someone became a dean, a place that had it, so they don't have as much connection now that they're further away from boots on the ground, if you will, professors. Would you mind providing a brief explanation of the field of sport management?
Sure. The field, like many subdisciplines of kinesiology, has derivatives that date back to physical education programs. So the first known sport management course that I believe that I've seen on the records was at University of Wisconsin-Madison back in 1911. It was an administration and organization of sport course that was developed to promote understanding of the management of athletic competitions and teams. And then right around the mid-1960s, Earl Ziegler and a few other scholars began promoting the reorganization of physical education as an academic discipline. And in response to a lot of publicized criticism of the discipline of physical education, Earl Ziegler and King McChrystal began a series of conversations entitled The Big Ten Body of Knowledge. These conversations led to recommendations that were ultimately published in the journal Quest and called for the development of several specialized areas in physical education. So 6 different areas. One, sociology of sport and physical education was one. Administrative theory was a second area. History, philosophy, and comparative physical education and sport was a third area. Exercise physiology was a fourth area. Biomechanics was a fifth area. And then motor learning and sports psychology is the sixth area. So I've touched a lot of those bases with my academic background in exercise physiology and biomechanics, and taken extensive coursework in sports psychology, and then of course have degrees in sport management. Well, as those subdisciplines and specialties eventually grew to the extent that standalone programs in those areas were developed. So Ohio University established a master's program in sport management back in 1966. And then University of Massachusetts established a second master's program in sport management in 1971. So if you look back at some of the literature, you can see in 1985, the National Association for Sport and Physical Education reported that there were at least 40 undergraduate sport management programs in the United States and 32 graduate programs back in 1985. But today we are well in excess of 410 undergraduate programs, 235 master's programs, 33 PhD programs in the US. And the programs are based in a wide array of colleges, certainly colleges of education like here at FSU, but business colleges, some kinesiology focused colleges, tourism and hospitality, even public health. Indiana University has their sport management program in a school of public health. So, and then sport management today, as it has grown, it actually has several subdisciplines of its own that have branched out. So when you go to apply for abstract review for a presentation at the North American Society for Sport Management, they give you a number of different categories where you can apply under. Those include areas like sport communication, facilities and events, sport finance, sport economics, governance and policy, sport law, management, organizational behavior, organizational theory, those areas, marketing, socio-cultural aspects of sport, sport development and sport for development. And then you're starting to see other growing areas that could eventually become subdisciplines as well. Certainly things like sport ecology, sport tourism, sport analytics are all emerging areas within the field. So that's kind of an overview of how it began and how it's branched out and become even more specialized over time.
Yeah, I know we'll touch on this a bit as we go forward on the expansion that takes place. I do want to make a recommendation for those listening. If you want, leave a comment on Facebook or what have you, or send a message, and we will see those pop-in comments I get. So if you have questions or anything you want to throw in for support, please send it. I can bring those up later on, and we collect those so we can answer them at the end. But go ahead and leave it on Facebook or YouTube, and I can catch those comments and ask them if you have any questions. And I mean, honestly, I would think if you're not familiar with sport management, you might have some questions because it has broadened drastically just in the 10 years of my own professional time period of being in the field. But even before then, it already started to separate out. And so, I think the first thing that we really need to focus on is kind of what is the value sport management brings to higher education and kinesiology.
Well, it's sometimes difficult to quantify the exact size and economic impact of the sport industry, but some industry size estimates have the sport industry as high as the 6th largest industry in the world. So I'm still behind massive sectors like real estate and banking, but ahead of a lot of other large industries in the world. So I think considering the tangential impacts, you got to look at it at both just not only the sport participation side, but also the sport spectator side. Trying to quantify the actual size of the industry can be challenging. For example, if one of my good friends here lives out of state, came to Tallahassee this last week to participate in a race, and so that was sport-related participant travel. He probably would not have come to Tallahassee had there not been that event. But then that ties into the transportation industry, that ties into hotel and lodging industry and so forth as it goes along. So sometimes it's difficult to quantify, but some estimates have it as large as the 6th largest industry in the world now. And sport is often served as a vehicle for social impact and evolution, certainly with Title IX and how that manifested in the athletic realm, social justice movements and issues. I think as an academic program, sport management offers a number of benefits to universities and higher education at large. The potential for employment in the sport industry is very attractive to a sizable number of students in academic programs. Those students fill seats in classrooms, residence halls, and dining halls on campus, which helps universities cover their basic operational costs. Now, that can create some concerns about overproducing graduates for a highly competitive workplace in sport management, and some academic programs have focused on enhancing their brands by choosing a focus on quality and limiting access to their programs to only the most prepared students. And so our undergraduate program at Florida State is this way. It's a limited access program. Only a certain number of students are admitted each year into the program. And it's so popular, being one of the top ranked programs, that we turn away a sizable number of students, more than we're able to accept. Other sport management programs that are out there have very limited or no control over admission into their programs. Maybe their university doesn't have a limited access for their undergraduate program, and so as long as they can meet the university level requirements, they are allowed to immediately progress right into the major. Those programs often can be challenged by high student to faculty ratios, and larger number of graduates then who are unable to secure suitable employment in the sport industry. There is no macro level oversight that matches student demand with industry job opening levels. So universities are they're individual actors in a much larger system. And one university that restricts access to pursue higher quality, like FSU, we might simply be rejecting students who are going to find a program with less demanding admission requirements and enroll there. However, I think in the long term, chasing short-term enrollment gains that weaken your program's brand, when you see a larger quantity of your program graduates struggling to secure suitable employment, that can have lasting negative impacts on a program. So I think that's certainly it's a benefit to higher education, but also a challenge that we have to do our best to try to align educational opportunities with job opportunities and the field as well.
Yeah, I think you point out the fun juxtapose issue with the sport industry. The fact is you have this massive industry that has massive amounts of jobs in theory, and all this that's going on, when probably the fastest growing industries globally, even in the US, it's one of our best exports. And yet we still have to come back to that whole conversation of, okay, so it's really competitive. And not only do you have people who are doing sport management degrees who are trying to get into the field, we've got people who might be in, say, digital artwork who are going to the digital media side competing for it. We've got people who come from business who are going through and applying for almost any job that sport management does. We have people coming from communications and maybe going in from that aspect of it. And so I guess that really we have to come down, and that gets asked really quickly, is, so what is the value for students in actually getting a sport management degree, considering how competitive that field really is?
Well, that's a great question, Dan. And I would say if a student is truly passionate about working in the sport industry, there still seems to be no better pathway than through pursuit of an undergraduate academic degree. And furthermore, I think a graduate degree these days can really help differentiate a job candidate from other applicants, or provide, if they're already in the industry, it can provide some opportunities for further promotion. So having higher percentages of the population overall engaged in sport management education, I think it's a good thing. It will also help define higher levels of excellence in the industry. If you have a more educated society, they can be a more engaged society, and sport can be a vehicle used to drive positive social change. And as I kind of mentioned earlier, there is no commissioner for sport management education that has that macro level oversight. But I do think that the relatively recent introduction of specialized accreditation in the field via the Commission on Sport Management Accreditation, or COSMA, as it's more commonly known, I think that's a very positive step forward in the evolution of the discipline. Specialized accreditation is, not only a seal of quality for current and prospective students in the program, but it can also help spur excellence and additional investment when needed internally within the university. In environments where universities face limited resources, accredited academic programs that have needs that are highlighted by an accrediting body have a far better chance of acquiring internal support than those programs that are not accredited. And to be honest with you, Dan, I'm a little bit disappointed in how slow the response has been for sport management programs to pursue specialized accreditation through COSMA. But I think a number of the programs have been taking a wait and see approach. This is new for our field, and perhaps the time is coming soon when even a more educated student population they'll increase demand for admission to accredited programs. compared to unaccredited programs. And then when you really start to see a lot of the adjustments is when sport industry executives, if they start seeing consistently better prepared graduates in accredited programs, that's going to eventually make graduation from an accredited program a distinguishing factor for employment for them, and that's going to further drive demand for accreditation. So in the long term, specialized accreditation is the best way to ensure sport management programs enhance their quality, not just their quantity, because we all function independently as sport management programs, but we all collectively influence the overall perception of sport management in society. In many ways, the academic side of sport management is only as strong as its weakest program that's out there. And so we have to, I think accreditation helps to ensure that we have quality actors in the field that have the best interests of the discipline at heart.
I do think that brings up a great point when we start talking about how, I mean, not just competitive our students have to be, but also that quality control that comes from the industry. It's only been probably in the last like 7 or 8 years that I've seen more and more of those who are with sport management degrees actually now doing a lot of the hiring, right? Like they've now entered middle and some upper management. Prior to this, probably like at the beginning of my career a decade ago, those individuals came from a plethora of backgrounds and whatever it was that specialized in them to get there. Only in the last, probably, I'd say good 7 years, as I've started to talk to and engage with individuals, I've really started to see them come back and go, well, I'm kind of starting to ask questions in interviews now, like, have you had this coursework? Because what I don't want to do is have to go back and teach the basics. And my question is, do you at least have those down? So now we're just working on this content area that's specific to what your job is, and then maybe improving your leadership skills or your some of your work ethic skills that we have. What I don't want to have to go back and do is have to explain the basics of marketing to you or any of those things.
Yeah.
I do know we got some feedback going on there, and just to let you know, Dr. Andrew had mentioned that COSMA, COSMA, is the accrediting body for sport management. I can see that's taking place inside our chats. But definitely take a look. They're wonderful. For those who, I know a lot of fear comes out of this, where people worry that COSMA is going to immediately take over your program and change the culture of your program. But the reality is I've worked very closely with them over the past little bit too. And their entire goal is to really just sit down and create a synthesized function that works for you. Because again, not every program is entirely developed the same, right? You may have a specific intention. So they don't want to sit down and be like, well, everyone has to have the exact same class, to the point that you can't have, especially in sport marketing. Like that's not the goal, is to eliminate any potential of developing a niche field. But I don't want to speak too far on their end of it. Maybe one day we can have Heather Alderman on here to explain COSMA. We've talked about it accrediting. For those in AK, one of the most issues that have come up, I've had 3 emails in the last 3 weeks about, can we talk about accreditation as a whole across kinesiology? So there's a strong chance I'll reach out to them as well to really elaborate on those things. But when you're talking about 460 programs in the nation, give or take, that's a lot in already what is a massively competitive field, and when you're still competing with other majors. So I definitely could see the benefit of saying, okay, well, we've instituted some quality control to make sure you have specific class orientations and that you have specific goals that were met through classes and so forth. So I do have some questions coming in. All of y'all appreciate it. I will ask those questions in the next probably about 20 minutes as we get to the end, because I think we're going to expand a little bit on this topic as we go into the idea of what do you think. Well, one of the things we didn't really expand is really the explanation of a question wasn't popping up, so there you go. Could you explain the expansions into the different academic organizations? I think sport management probably has demonstrated this the best I've seen in the last 15 years of we going from one kind of mother major organization to exploding into a fury of multiple organizations that exist out there. And so kind of how that happened and kind of what that might mean.
Sure. Well, I've seen the formation, in my opinion, of sport management associations. They've really been driven by 2 different factors, Stan. One of them is geography, as you've seen different programs, different areas of the world needing to create their own sport management societies, and the other area is subdiscipline specialty. So I'll address the geography first. Of course, the North American Society for Sport Management, or NASM as it's more commonly known, was founded in 1985. And there were several individuals involved in that founding. Then in 1993, you see a European Association for Sport Management, otherwise known as ESAM, was founded. So about 8 years later after that, then the Sport Management Association of Australia and New Zealand, or SMANZ as it's more commonly known, that was founded in 1995, so 10 years after NASM. And then with those three major regional sport management associations that were out there, an International Sport Management Alliance that was represented by members of NASM, ESAM, and SMANZ was formally established in 1999, and they would go around and hold joint conferences with the regional associations in even-numbered years. So, maybe 1998, they would tag along with the ESAM conference. And then in 2000, they would tag along with NASM. And then in 2002, they would tag along with SMANZ and so forth. Then on top of that, an Asian Association of Sport Management was founded in 2002. A Latin American association, which is called, I hope I don't mess this up too much, but the Asociación Latinoamericana de Gerencia Deportiva, otherwise known as Al-Haiti, was founded in 2009. An African Sport Management Association was founded in 2010. And then a World Association of Sport Management was established in 2012 by members of various regional associations. And that's really kind of taken the torch from the previous International Sport Management Alliance and has allowed all those different regional associations from Australia, New Zealand, and Asia, and Africa, Latin America, and so forth to all be part of a larger group. So that's one way that it's developed, is through geography. The other way sport management associations have been developed over time is when subdisciplines have emerged and maybe either acknowledged the need for additional specialization in their respective areas. And they have done that sometimes by content or context. So we have, of course, NASM was still founded in 1985. Then you started seeing other associations that developed over time. Sport and Recreation Law Association, founded in 1988. They held their first conference at Jekyll Island. They have another group, Sport Lawyers Association, which is founded in 1975, actually predated the establishment of NASM. The Sport Marketing Association was founded in 2002, and that's become one of the larger areas. Certainly, when you look at conference submissions for abstracts at NASM, it's one of the largest areas of where we have strong cohorts of faculty. The Drake Group was founded in 1999, and they're heavily focused in the context of collegiate athletics. There are other areas where sport management scholars will be involved. Maybe the North American Society for the Sociology of Sport, which was founded in '78 prior to NASM, and the North American Society for Sport History in 1972, founded before NASM. But we also have the International Association of Sport Economists that was founded in 1999, the International Association for Communication in Sport that was founded in 2002, the College Sport Research Institute, currently at the University of South Carolina, was originally established back in 2007. And the Applied Sport Management Association, founded in 2015, and had derivatives from the prior Southern Sport Management Association that preceded it. So a lot of those over time developed either because they saw the need for additional specialization in their subdiscipline, or perhaps they felt that the larger umbrella organization of NASM and was maybe not meeting the needs and growth development needs for their particular subdiscipline. So it's been interesting to see those associations grow from a geographical and a specialization basis.
So we're going to throw a question there. Is the explosion of growth into multiple subdisciplines going to be long-term possibly a positive or negative, or who knows kind of scenario? Because again, we always have that discussion of siloing inside higher ed.
Yeah, I think it can be both positive. It can be positive if it's managed correctly. So, I mean, when you're in any discipline, whether it's sport management or other physics, any other academic discipline, certainly the way that you reach some of these discoveries is by drilling deep and getting in more and more specialized. However, if you drill so far deep and you don't come up for air every now and then to see what's going on around you, you may drill so far that you're no longer relevant, and you're working on something that is not currently meaningful, and doesn't have any connection with where the field is going. So it's important to have people who have both that um, that vertical ability to dig deep and become more specialized, but also I think it's important for scholars to have the ability to branch out in other areas and see how their work is connected, because there's lots of work that's going on in the sport communication area right now that may have sport marketing implications or could have sport law implications. And you see certain aspects where those subdisciplines are really at a nexus, and touch both of them, and you have to have experts in those areas, or otherwise you're going to be caught researching something that becomes trivial and not meaningful.
Sorry, I can understand that. As a person who's been in the field, right, that's the constant downside of having a field that is evolving on a daily basis. The beautiful thing is I can walk into my classroom and have something brand new to talk about going on in the sport management industry on any given day. The downside is, from the research standpoint, being able to do research fast enough to stay relevant with the industry, who in 9 months to a year has moved on to another issue or problem to solve and things like that. And so, yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's the crux of facing and working with sport management in the industry itself for our organizations. And like you said, that becomes the how deep do you go and decide a subfield that you still don't stay relevant or not. So, which kind of leads into the next kind of topic, when we have to take a step back, really, what is the future or potential futures, depending on what path we take, of sport management? And this could be both, if you want to talk about the industry as well as the field, that's also acceptable. So
Sure. Well, I think one of them is what we just discussed. I do think we're going to still see continued specialization. That's certainly probable right now. You're seeing these emerging areas like sport ecology, sport analytics, that are starting to garner larger constituencies. And so um, I think that there's momentum to continue to move in that area. But as I mentioned earlier, too much specialization can be problematic. So it's important to make sure. I actually think it highlights the importance of having a broader umbrella organization for the field that helps find ways to bring scholars together, from various subdisciplines. I'm still, I'm still kind of sad of the way things kind of turned out with AFERD. I mean, I used to enjoy going to those conferences. With my background, having degrees in biomechanics and sport management, and expertise in some sport psychology and exercise physiology, I really felt like I could speak all those languages, and it was a great place where scholars could come together and talk about particular issues in the field, that may cross those different subdiscipline areas. Well, sport management's kind of, NASM really serves that umbrella organization well, but if you're a very, very focused scholar in sport marketing, there's some scholars out there that only go to the Sport Marketing Association conference, that no longer go to the NASM conference, and you miss out an opportunity there to meet other scholars in the field that are focused on other subdisciplines, but maybe working on some of the same topical work that you're doing right now. So I do think, along those same lines, the field of sport management has evolved over the past 55 years or so. The field has done a better job of detailing the uniqueness of the sport industry, which, I mean, to me, that is the primary premise for the establishment of specialized sport management programs. If we didn't have, if we weren't unique, then a general business background would be sufficient, and the world would not need specialized sport management programs. And so, common claims of uniqueness to the sport industry include things like, the simultaneous nature of sport production and consumption. Sport is being produced and consumed simultaneously, which is a unique aspect compared to other industries. The perishable nature of the sport product. The NBA season just finished up recently, the regular season did at least. Once there were unsold seats, I'm sure, in those arenas at some point during the season, that's a missed opportunity there. Once that event is concluded and once knowledge of the result is out there, there's limited monetary impact of that event. The unpredictable nature of sport outcomes, that preclude the guarantee of customer satisfaction with the outcome. You're buying a ticket and you don't know whether or not you're going to be satisfied with the outcome or not. In some cases, maybe your star player is not even going to be playing that game. They're sitting out or they're injured. the unique sport enterprise financial structure where really the significant portion of revenue that's generated, at least in a lot of professional sports, are coming from things other than ticket sales, and that are related to the core service. So things like media rights and concessions and parking and all those other aspects that are really driving the financial model. That's somewhat unique. Unique career paths that place a premium on volunteer experience and networking, and certainly sport being the power of sport as a social institution is important. Back in 2010, Smith and Stewart took a larger list of factors, of unique factors in sport, and condensed them down to 4. And I think it's good to review these. They talked about sport being a heterogeneous and ephemeral experience mired in the irrational passion of fans, commanding high levels of product and brand loyalty, optimism, and vicarious identification. You just don't see that in a lot of other industries where people build to some extent their personal identity around the success of their sport team or lack of success. Sport favors on-field winning over profit. And that's also a unique factor compared to traditional business models where profit is the primary driver. Sport is subject to variable quality, which in turn has implications for the management of competitive balance and anti-competitive behavior that we see pop up from time to time. And sport has to manage a fixed supply schedule. So I think from a research perspective, the field has started to move beyond testing whether or not general business theories hold up into the sport context, and we've started now developing our own theoretical models that actually accommodate the unique aspects of sport. And we really must continue to forge new ground in this area. I recently co-edited a special issue of the Journal of Global Sport Management back in the beginning of 2021 on the uniqueness of the sport context to really try to attract more research in this area. And we need to have calls like this periodically in our field just to remind the scholars of why it's important to have research out there that shows how unique the sport industry is, because if it's not unique, then again, why do we have the need for specialized sport management programs? I mean, those are some of the things that I think that are coming up, in the near future and that we have to pay attention to.
Yeah, I do work with my class would if they heard me make fun of me for saying this, but I was like, the first principle you have to walk away from before we dive into understanding sport management is understanding that normal customers that we deal with from the business side and fans are not exactly the same thing. As a fan of specific sport teams, as a person who graduated from SEC school, following sports as well as my field plays a huge role. Does not mean the product I gave money to works out very well every single season. Now, if I buy a vacuum cleaner, the vacuum cleaner doesn't work out, I hate the vacuum cleaner, no warranty on the vacuum cleaner, whatever, I don't buy another one of that brand ever. However, as a fan, just because I have a horrendous season that is publicly humiliated by everybody on TV, so I get to very much know how bad my season was, I still end up supporting the next year, right? Like that's where we start talking about that is very different in that consideration. And so, from my standpoint, that's the first step. Why we apply business principles a lot of times, that's how we've been teaching for a while. Understand that already you're going to have a difference in response to those principles just based on the fact that fans and customers are not exactly the same. And I think engagement expectations are very different between the two, right? Like the expectation of someone who buys something from a brand or their coffee in the morning is very different from someone who shows up to their sports favorite stadium, and so I do think that we see major differences. And so the fact that the field is starting to more look at the industry as a unique property for business, and it might have unique expectations, I think will be a huge benefit going forward. I think you're absolutely right. So with that, I have one official question, and then I have questions coming in from individuals that we'll ask afterwards. So the last official question I have is there any advantages to having a sport management background as an academic administrator? I know we have management in there, but again, looking at it from an academic administrator side, is there is that background creating value for the academic admin side?
Yeah, I've actually, Dan, found a tremendous advantage in higher education by having a sport management background, and I probably will need to explain further here. But I mean, one of the more obvious benefits is having a deeper understanding of college athletics, I think, which plays a prominent role at many of the universities where we're employed. Understanding how competitions are arranged and governing bodies are structured, as well as how the various constituents and unique funding of college athletics, its platform for societal impact. Knowing those things ahead of time, when I wake up in the morning coming in and not having to learn that on the job, that's a tremendous advantage to me over many administrators who may not even follow or understand sport. But however, I found a lot of commonalities between the sport industry itself and higher education that have really helped my transition into academic administration. Some of these I touched on earlier, but we talk about the uniqueness of sport industry being the simultaneous nature of production and consumption. If I'm Apple and producing iPhones, I can produce that iPhone today, and if you don't buy it today, that's fine. It's still going to be there tomorrow. You can buy it the next day. You can buy it the next day, right? It can store. Now you may lose some value with it over time as the chips become outdated or what have you. But sport, of course, is produced and consumed at the same time, and higher education is very similar. Both industries involve experience management, and the tangible aspect, which is the ticket that you buy for the sporting event, or the diploma that you eventually put up on your wall. It's that experience that's behind the diploma, and whether or not it involves lasting changes that promote your success or your understanding of the world around you. That's truly what drives the value of higher education. Just like the experience behind that ticket that gets you admission into a sporting event, that's what's important. The ticket itself is secondary compared to the experience behind that. So I would say there's some commonalities there in the simultaneous nature of production and consumption. The perishable nature of the sport product, as I mentioned earlier, all those unsold NBA seats for the regular season, it's too late to do much about them now. The monetizing potential of those games are significantly reduced now, maybe some highlight films or something for some of the teams, but other than that, there's not much ways you can make money off of that. In higher education, classroom seats are available until the last day of drop ad deadline each semester, right? But once that date passes, the opportunity to engage in that class, at least for that time and that term, it's passed. And then finally, I would say, the unpredictable nature of sport outcomes. You don't know whether or not you're going to enjoy the experience. You buy that ticket, you make the purchase prior to experiencing the sporting event. Well, and you can make some assumptions, maybe based on the team's win-loss record, all these other different factors and analytics that are out there as to whether or not the game is going to be a close game, or whether your preferred team is going to be the dominant team or not. But the reality is that the outcome of that event is uncertain, and upsets happen from time to time. So the sports spectator purchase access to the event prior to knowing whether or not they're going to be satisfied with the outcome. And higher education, there are quality indicators that are out there. There may be university rankings or program rankings that you can rely on. There may be other factors that influence your decision, but ultimately tuition is prepaid before the educational experience takes place. And so you're kind of making a leap of faith that the funding that you're applying towards it is going to create an outcome that's going to have a meaningful impact on your life. So I've actually found a lot of transfer from the sport management background and sport industry to the higher education industry that helps me understand, how you market something like an NBA game and the experience behind it and so forth translates into higher education, and how you would market that as an experience as well. So there's been lots of commonalities. I think that's helped accelerated my understanding of a lot of the best practices in higher education administration.
Excellent. I think that actually it's interesting as a person who works in the admin side a bit, and then also on top of that is in sport management. I've never put them together in that way, looking at retention in comparison to things like a perishable item. You're selling your season versus you're selling your semester, and that's a absolutely excellent point. So man, See, that's not often that I get shocked at asking questions on responses, but this is one of, because we talked beforehand, and this is one of them. I was actually like, that's a phenomenal point that we didn't even talk about beforehand. But no, absolutely, I do appreciate you sharing that because I think it's great. And again, we're getting ready to start going to your all's questions. So if you have any more you want to ask, please do so. I'm going to start working through them right now. So the first question I had coming from Gil Reeve, it's on the bottom of the screen, but I'll read it out loud as well in case people are just listening. Given the rapid expansion of the field, does sport management, with management in quotations, still serve as the best or appropriate name for the field?
Interesting question, and good to hear from you, Gil. You know, I've seen more arguments over whether or not sport should be singular or plural than I have whether or not management versus administration, and some of the other terms that are out there. A lot of times, to be honest with you, from the universities where I've been employed, whether or not a program is referred to as a sport. So when I was at University of Louisville, I believe the program was referred to as sport administration. And part of the reasons why is because they had some rules in the books where you had to get approval from the College of Business if you were going to use certain words in your course titles or program names. And my understanding was is the business college there did not want the word management being used outside of their college. And so it was called sport administration there as opposed to sport management. And I've seen the opposite, where places have insisted that it be called sport management as opposed to sport administration. It's interesting now you're starting to see some of those subdisciplines actually emerge and create their own niche programs. Maybe they started off as specializations in a master's degree or undergraduate specialization, and now they're creating their own certificate programs, maybe in sport marketing and some of the other different areas that are out there. So I'll be interested to see whether or not that is something that takes hold in the field moving forward. Again, most of the arguments that I've seen argue whether or not you should use sport singular, which would refer to all of sport, as opposed to sports plural, which may or may not include the full definition of what some people think sport is. But interesting concept.
Yeah, and it does change, I know, from program to program. Why typically I see sport admin and sport management across the board, like our university uses sport business, but the reason why is we minor in business and we have overlap in business. So you start there and then you specialize in sport aspects of it in those classes. So you take a regular marketing class and then you'd start with sport marketing after that fact. So that concept is where, and it is interesting. I think, we've had arguments, should the three be separate and the curriculum for them be separate? Do they have different meanings? And then, yeah, it's a great, I think it's a great question that we don't all have the answer to yet either. And as we go forward.
Well, I think related to that also comes to, where sport management programs should be housed. And there's been lots of, philosophical arguments about that over the years.
Odd you to mention that. I'm going to stop you so I can put that question up there for you. So,
okay.
Claire Williams, I'm going to bring this question up first, and I'll get back to your other question since it was brought up. So Claire Williams asked, where should sport management be housed in universities or colleges? Our program is located at the Department of Kinesiology with the School of Liberal Arts, and we get lost given the close association between kinesiology and exercise science.
Yeah, absolutely. I figured that question might eventually come. And there are so many unique configurations here in the U.S. I know sport management's in a College of Arts and Sciences at Texas Tech University and at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. You see some programs in colleges of business. I've seen some programs I mentioned earlier, Indiana University, School of Public Health. You've seen in colleges of education, where a lot of them began because of those historical roots, maybe to physical education. But over time, they've grown and developed. I've talked with a lot of faculty over the years who may be in an education college or some other type of college that has sport management, and they want to move over to a college of business environment, and seeing some shifts happen. When I was at Troy, actually, we created a School of Hospitality, Sport, and Tourism Management. Hospitality and tourism management came over from the College of Business, actually, to our College of Human Sciences or Human Services, Health and Human Services. And so a health focused type college. And then we created a standalone School of Hospitality, Sport, and Tourism Management. And it really grew. And then a couple of years after I left, the College of Business swooped in and took it back, after it had developed. And now it's a a thriving program there. I think some of the best advice I've heard about this over time really comes from Dan Mahoney, and he touches on this somewhat in his Ziegler lecture, which is published in the Journal of Sport Management. But it doesn't matter as much where you're housed within your college, but what your respect level is within that college. And so I've seen some sport management programs that were in colleges of education that, based upon their history in that college, may have been somewhere in the middle tier of respect for the programs that are there, or the top third. And then all of a sudden, they pushed to go to a college of business and made that shift. And then when they went over to the college of business, that reputation doesn't follow you. You start at the bottom and you work your way up. And there's the old statement, people who are in power tend to do what they need to do to remain in power. And so those programs that are ahead of you then on the pecking order in the new college where you're in, they are certainly going to do whatever they can do to make sure that there's not a lot of representation maybe from your program or your department at senior levels and making those types of decisions. And so there's a political aspect to it as well, and how you manage that piece of it. So for me, I've always thought about whether or not are you respected where you are. To me, is a more important question to have answered, rather than where you should ultimately end up from a higher education administration and functional standpoint of how you're going to be able to thrive as a program. But if you are too far removed from the mission and focus of the college, then you do risk the point, I think, that maybe Claire is making, that you may not necessarily be a focal point of the college's strategic plan, or of where they're trying to add additional resources and where they're trying to move the needle forward in terms of the development of their future. So there can be challenges from that point as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know I've actually presented on this topic a few years back, looking at schools of business in comparison to schools of education, being housed in kinesiology in short. And I think you're spot on with it comes down to the respect level. And I think that really hits home, is really, and the first standpoint, this is why we're doing a session like this today. We're talking about sport management and hoping that people who don't always engage with sport management directly get to kind of see what it is, what it involves, where the field's at right now. That helps them better work with their faculty and their undergraduate and graduate students as they go through programs that someone might be chairing or a dean of, but not know a whole lot about, and kind of providing that both awareness, and then hopefully that leads to action. But I can honestly say, the programs I've seen be successful both in business and in kinesiology, especially if they're dominant, say you're a program that's in a very, say, exercise heavy, programming like you've talked about, Claire, or in business where you might have a major marketing program, but they decide to tack in sport management because people like the numbers and seats a lot of times. Most sport management programs, or admin programs, seem to be relatively healthy. And in a world of where we're constantly talking about retention, seems to be an issue. So what ends up happening a lot of times is being noticed really seems to come down a lot if people see you. So I hate to say, like, using social media all the time, things like that, but producing enough content where people can see you exist and what you do when you exist does help keep that on the discussion point. And so we've had it where students have been successful and gone out and done things. We've bragged about it. And then I noticed that, VPs or the president might denote it when they saw it get picked up by the university's Twitter account or by their Instagram account or whatever they decide to share with. And that comes back to that kind of discussion point. And so, and man, if you get any alumni that go into professional sports teams, inviting them back to speak, man, I've never had a problem usually, because people love sports as a whole. I've never had a lot of problems getting VPs to be like, oh, I'd love to come listen to, like, the director of marketing that is a former alumni, come be involved. So I think those things just help raise the profile, and as a consequence, a lot of times, hopefully helps raise the respect level as time goes on.
Yeah, so I try to think of the saying, all sport management reputation is local. Of all the universities where I've worked, I would certainly say, actually, Troy University's sport management program definitely had a very, very strong reputation on campus and was well respected, well beyond the confines of the college. And a lot of that had to do with, they happened to have a number of administrators who had sport management PhDs. Ironically, they were all graduates of Florida State, but one was a vice chancellor of one of their campuses, Don Jeffrey. Another one was Lance Tatum, who's currently the provost of the university, but at that time was dean of the College of Education. And you had other graduates that were there and had really built the program and helped people understand what sport management as a discipline is. And so I certainly felt that there was a broad understanding of what the sport management program was across campus there, and you didn't always have to answer the question of, okay, what do you do? I'm sport management. Okay, so you tape ankles, and do you do what? No, that's not this. Where I've had to answer that question at other universities that are much higher up on the U.S. News and World Report rankings list. I think that the reputation there is always local. So you've got to, those are the things, certainly when you're in the job market and interviewing, those are things you want to pay attention to when you're on campus as to what the respect level is like within the college and then outside the college and across the university, because that often can be an indicator of where you're going to get additional resources.
Absolutely. Like I said, Flash works both ways. The same reasons all your students come in is because they want to work for a pro sports team. Your upper admins like the association as best they can. So whatever you can do to really get that recognition. And so I'm going to ask one more question. I think we have our last question for the day listed here, and then we'll close out. And this question Claire asked earlier, so I'm coming back to it. And so I apologize because we had to wait till the end here, Claire. But that comes down to the question if when you were in charge of making, and this is not going to be an easy question, I think, but if when you were in charge of making updates to sport management curriculum, what content areas do you add and ensure are included for students in 2022 and into the near future so they are best prepared to enter the sports industry upon graduation?
Well, Dan, this is going to sound completely self-serving since I am the author of a research methods in sport management book, but I really do think if you look at where data analytics and sport analytics is going in the future, there are so many job opportunities that are opening in that realm. I think it's important for, certainly you could differentiate at the undergraduate level versus the master's level and the doctoral level of what you expect your graduates to be able to do. Is it just to be able to read and understand and apply existing research that's out there versus trying to come up with their own research question and testable hypotheses and moving forward and different types, employing different research methodologies to answer those questions, and everything in between. But I do think that certainly sport analytics is and research methods in sport management is constantly increasing. Every time I pick up a journal, I see new methods that are being employed, maybe from other areas, to address critical research questions in sport management. So I think that that's a piece. I do think also the sociological aspect of sport is very important. It's one of the key unique factors that we have about the sport industry is understanding those different pieces. And a lot of programs that I've been involved with have that, but I know of other programs out there that don't really have that emphasis. I think that certainly if they look at recent history in sport and the sport industry, it almost becomes essential to have that involved in your program moving forward. So certainly those two pieces are going to be key aspects. Another piece I would add in the area that we focus on here and at FSU is sports sales, and we've done this through a partnership with a sports sales institute here on campus. But a lot of the entry-level jobs for sport management graduates are going to be in the sales area. They may have desires to move into marketing, communications, or other aspects, but sports sales is often where a lot of people cut their teeth in the industry. And if you're able to sell tickets and sell and be involved with suite sales and other things like that for sport industry, it's a good skill. I think that's transferable as you move into other aspects, but that's where the jobs are to begin with. And once you just establish proficiency in those areas, then you can start looking to get into other areas of the organization. So we focus heavily on sport sales and trying to make sure that our students are well prepared in that aspect, because we know that regardless of what their career ambitions are, their first step very well may likely be in the sport sales arena.
Yeah, I think this is to me, this is probably one of the toughest questions you have to answer, because from the undergraduate perspective, you're like kind of everything, because right, like you said, these are aspects that we keep seeing change in sport. Are you being able to understand how culturally sensitive you have to be based on where you're located at? Do you understand how to pitch yourself or pitch whatever you're trying to sell? And if you think you don't need those skills, I'll give a great example of a former student of mine who everything you mentioned came into one discussion point. and that was they were going up for a raise in middle management of sports, and they'd been at an organization, a professional NFL organization, for about 6 years, 7 years now, and they're like, great. Well, for a raise, you're going to need to make a proposal on why we should give you a raise. And what we're really looking for is you to demonstrate and quantify your value, as well as the fact that you need to demonstrate you understand really what is the point of our organizations going forward, what we're trying to reach with our clientele and so forth inside. And so I get a phone call, and the questions basically are what you just talked about. It's like, how do I quantify my information? How do I develop analysis to prove I'm worth something? Because this person no longer works in sales or anything. They're like, at least then I could say this is how much money I've made for the program. But they're like, I don't work in that area anymore. I work in an area that is mostly developing things that don't have dollar amounts to them anymore. And so how do I? So I mean, it was a 3-day conversation. The person had the answers. They really did. They just needed someone to self-validate a lot of those with them. But and they're also tying it, like you said, from a sociology perspective. Who are their clients now? How has that shifted? How has this person engaged in the clients they first met to change with the new clients and are garnering new clients or new fans? How are they being sensitive to the cultures that they're now targeting? Because at that point, the organization was actually targeting 2 different cultures on top of their normal fan base that was coming and buying tickets. And they're like, okay, that was not what I planned on having to do. And then, of course, they have to sit down and just sell themselves and sell the department and organization. Unfortunately, they were really nervous because their specific chief officer of their section was actually present at that meeting to see how well they sold their department. And so I just want to see how good you do. And it did result in them actually moving up, which was awesome for them because that was one of the big factors. But here we're talking about all 3 of those things, and they all came together in one moment. And I think that's one of those things where, it's not so simple. I think it's one of those things we have to look back and say these things are all important to a certain degree, and it gets very convoluted, both professional development and the issues of dealing with, the individual niches of, like, say, sociology, sales, and so forth. And so I think those are phenomenal points. I know we're reaching time. And I want to reach out and say thank you. I've gotten a ton of positive comments. It took me a while to go through them all, but thank you guys so much for those who are writing and just saying thanks and liking and so forth. If for some reason you did not, you wrote something on YouTube or you wrote something on Twitter and I didn't get it, I didn't see a whole lot coming on those, let me know by sending me an email. I'm going to provide that below as well, just because I'm making sure our programs pick up everything as they go forward. Additionally, I want to say if you guys have any topics that you want to introduce in the future, we're right now prepping for the fall as well. So any ideas or topics you'd like us to explore further in kinesiology, by all means, my email now is at the bottom of the screen. Just write those in. But I want to say thank you so much, Dr. Andrew. Is there any last words you want to leave?
Well, just thank you, Dan, for the service and for all you're doing for AKA. And you and I talk a lot offline. I'm just really impressed. You're certainly a rising star in the field, and I'm honored to have been invited to do this today, and happy to support anything that you're doing moving forward.
Well, thank you. As a person who does get to talk to you a little bit outside of the normal official channels, I do realize how extremely busy you are. So I'm glad you were able to make it today. And again, thank you all who tuned in. If you want someone else to watch this who didn't get to catch it, it is available on YouTube. It should be available for replay within minutes, as well as it should be available on Facebook on replay as well. So that way it's fully there for anyone who wants to see it. So on behalf of American Kinesiology, Dr. Andrew, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Thank you all for turning in. Have a great weekend.